Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. I am excited to be able to speak with you all. My name is Matt Van Winkle. I am a friend of Justin Evans, and so he graciously asked if I would do this. And when he said Hebrews, I was like, yeah, sure, I can talk about Hebrews. Hebrews is not up there with my favorite books. You guys may not be able to see it, but there's like a whole shelf here that's just Galatians and Acts, because those two are among my favorites. And but when it comes to Hebrews, I've slowly become someone who is appreciative of what Hebrews is offering. I also really love, not ironically, actually really do love the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament. I know a lot of people will get there and they might get bogged down because of all the rules and everything, but I think that there is something beautiful in being able to understand how these individuals thought and what was important to them for festivals. At church today, we were talking about all the festivals, and my kid leaned over to me and was like, "That's a lot of festivals." And it's like, yeah, because they were supposed to be partying. They were supposed to enjoy what God had for them. And I think that Hebrews gives us a chance to look at that again and to understand the importance of that for us today. So I'm going to look specifically in Hebrews chapter 9. There's a couple things there that really tie back to the Levitical conversation. And I want to make some connections and talk about how I think that that's important for us today. And Hebrews starts this conversation, I think, a little bit back at the beginning of chapter 7. We get the nature of Melchizedek's priesthood as the king of Salem. And then as we move forward, the author tells us that Jesus is in this line of priests from Melchizedek, pulling from the Psalms. He then tells us that Jesus, as this high priest in the order of Melchizedek, is a priest of a better covenant, because not only is this one that is going to require consistent sacrifice, but this is one where that's not going to be required. And then we talk about the arrangement and the ritual of the earthly sanctuary. So now we're going to go over Leviticus in this conversation, and in that Day of Atonement, which is just such a beautiful representation of God's love for us. When we look at the Pentateuch, the Torah, those first 5 books, we get to see Leviticus at the very center of that. And then at the very center of Leviticus is this Day of Atonement, where the priest offers the sacrifice for the people, cleanses the tabernacle, and then meets with God. And there's something beautiful about that moment where humanity gets to meet with God in the tabernacle and later in the temple. And Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11 is going to tell us about how this is something that is no longer an external requirement. And so I'm going to read, we're starting in verse 11, and I'm going to read to verse 28. It says this: "But now Christ has come as the high priest of the good things to come. He passed through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is not of this creation. And he entered once for all into the most holy place, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood. And so he himself secured eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a young cow sprinkled on those who were defiled consecrated them and provided ritual purity, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from the dead works to worship the living God? And so he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the eternal inheritance he has promised, since he died to set them free from the violations committed under the first covenant. For where there is a will, the death of the one who made it must be proven. For a will takes effect only at death, since it carries no force while the one who made it is alive. So even the first covenant was inaugurated with blood. For when Moses had spoken every command to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that God has commanded you to keep." And both the tabernacle and all the utensils of worship he likewise sprinkled with blood. Indeed, according to the law, almost everything was purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. So it was necessary for the sketches of the things in heaven to be purified with these sacrifices. But the heavenly things themselves required better sacrifices than these, the goats and the calves. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with hands, the representation of the true sanctuary, but into heaven itself. And now he appears now in God's presence for us. And he did not enter to offer himself again and again, the way the high priest enters the sanctuary year after year with blood that is not his own. For then he would have to suffer again and again since the foundation of the world. But now he has appeared once for all, at the consummation of the ages, to put away sin by his sacrifice. And just as people are appointed to die once and then face judgment, so also, after Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many, to those who eagerly await him, he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation. So looking at this, right, there's two things that are happening simultaneously. We are discussing the Old Testament paradigm of the tabernacle and what it looked like for that ritual to be done. And then we're also discussing how this is happening on a cosmic scale. This is happening in heaven. This is happening for the world in the action of Jesus. So let's talk a little bit about what it looked like in the Old Testament on that Day of Atonement. I think that that's an incredibly important piece of that conversation. So I'm scrolling up and my computer is not loading the file like I want it to. There we go. So when we look at the Day of Atonement, this is how the day operates. First, a bull, a ram, and 2 goats are selected. Next, the goats are divided into 2. One will be a second purification offering, and the other will have the sins of the nation placed on it and sent away into the wilderness. Then we begin the action of the day with the purification offering of the bull. This is in Leviticus 16, verse 11. Aaron, in this case he's specifically mentioned, but the high priest in general, will then enter the most holy place with a cloud of incense so that he cannot see the mercy seat, because he can't, otherwise he would die. He then takes the blood from the purification offering and sprinkles it on the mercy seat. The purification of the most holy place and the Ark of the Covenant, those are the first thing that happens on the Day of Atonement. So the bull is sacrificed, and then the purification happens, and that purification, again, is specifically of the mercy seat and the Ark of the Covenant. So after that, the goat designated for the purification offer is slaughtered and the blood sprinkled. And the text says this in 16:16. Thus he shall make atonement for the sanctuary because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel and because of their transgressions, all their sins. And so he shall do for the tent of meeting, which remains with them in the midst of their uncleanliness. Once that area is cleansed, the blood of the bull and the goat will cleanse the altar for the uncleanness of Israel in 16:19. Once we see that purification is complete, then Aaron lays his hands on the goat that he sends into the wilderness. So again, we have the purification of multiple different pieces, right? We get the purification of the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. Then we get the purification of the tent, and then we get the purification of the altar. And if you remember the way that that diagram looks, it's really interesting to me because according to this, the layout, and this is just going down from verse 11 to verse 19 in Leviticus chapter 16, you start the cleansing from the innermost point. The Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat are in the Holy of Holies, in the most holy place. And that's where you start the cleansing. And then you come out and cleanse the tent. And then you come out and cleanse the altar, which is at the very front. I want to hold this real quick because I think this is important in the sense of Jesus' ministry. When we look, one of my favorite passages, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, you guys can help me out if I am. I want to say it's in Mark chapter 5, but that also feels wrong. So I know the story, and I just can't remember exactly where it's at. But this is the area where you get Jesus' interaction with Jairus' daughter and his interaction with the woman with the issue of blood. And in both of these situations, the individual who touches Jesus is unclean. The individual who is making the physical contact with Jesus is unclean. The woman with the issue of blood who has been bleeding for years, she is consistently unclean. But the moment she touches just the hem of his garment, she is made clean. And then, to top it all off, there's very little more unclean than death. There's so much that has to go in to cleansing the body after touching another dead body. And yet, when Jesus interacts with this dead girl, he says, "Don't worry, she's just sleeping," and she rises. That interaction should make him unclean. So when we go back to this Levitical understanding and going back to what the author of Hebrews is saying, he's saying, look, when Jesus came, as Jesus was here, he was making things clean. Now, did the blood of his sacrifice somehow do something cosmically? Yeah, absolutely. Am I here to tell you exactly what that was and how that works? No, because I don't know. But what I am saying is that as he consistently did these things to make the world a place where God himself was inhabiting, this is part of that making of the cosmic tabernacle clean. So he's a mediator of the new covenant, it says in verse 15. So those who are called may receive the eternal inheritance he has promised, since he died to set them free from the violations committed under the first covenant. We also get that idea in verse 22. According to the law, almost everything was purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there was no forgiveness. Because in that sense, you had to purify the entire tabernacle for the Day of Atonement to happen. Again, going from the inside to the out. And then that forgiveness, that casting away of the sin, it being sent literally away on a goat, was something that had to happen. Now, we know that at the time of Christ's death, the veil is torn. And I think we have to agree that there is something in this text that's telling us that system is no longer in place. And we don't know exactly, obviously, when Hebrews was written. This could be something that is written before the temple's even destroyed in 70. And if that's the case, this is a conversation with individuals saying, hey, that temple the things that are done there, they're not needed anymore because Christ took care of that. And if it's after, think about this. If this is after the temple has already been destroyed, you can hear someone saying, listen, I know, fellow countrymen, that the status symbol that we had, the temple is gone. But let me tell you about the person who made it obsolete already. Let me tell you about Jesus, who has done the things to make this where it didn't matter. And I think when we talk about this heavenly tabernacle, I don't know about you, but in the past I have even just pictured a tabernacle on the clouds, which when we think about what it means to be a heavenly tabernacle, I don't think that that's an accurate representation. And when we think about it as, the entirety of the world, Jesus once again is purifying all that exists. And I like the ending as well in verses 27 and 28. And just as people are appointed to die once and then to face the final judgment, so also after Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many, to those who eagerly await him, he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation. There's something of hope in the fact that his return will bring salvation. His return will bring freedom. His return will bring the thing that he started when he was here the first time. Again, I think that this is one of those places where the more you know about the Levitical law, the more you can understand what's going on in this place, and that the consistently needing to be clean was simply how you approached God. I think that there's often a misunderstanding that being clean was sinful because you had to give a sin offering to negate that uncleanliness, but being unclean itself wasn't a sin. It was a sin to be unclean and then attempt to approach a holy God. That was a sin, and that was a transgression. But simply being unclean was something unavoidable. Everyone at one point in their life was unclean. And to go back to that image of Jesus, there's this consistent, again, where Jesus is making the unclean clean, that consistency is, again, here where he is making us clean so that we can approach a holy God. And that's what is achieved by his death, by the shedding of his blood, is that it is then placed on us and we are announced clean as we approach God. Well, I know there's a lot more to say about this, but I also don't want to keep you too long. If you have any questions or anything like that, let me know. I'm hoping I can be around. And if you guys want to know more, that'll be great.